Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And I have to say, I'm just going to say it right up front, I'm a little nervous because you'll find out. I mean, how I got into this was by writing about abuse and neglect that had happened with one person. So I'm a reporter, and when you hear about this stuff, we chase it down. So I hope that you'll excuse me for having that in the presentation, but it's part of how I came to be, how I came to write Falling Off the Cliff, and of course how I came to be here. So anyway, you know, it's interesting, when I knew that the conference was going to be happening this weekend, I'm like, wow, that's really close to Labor Day. And it's just, to me, it's just such an interesting juxtaposition. You know, Labor Day came about because people had pretty miserable working conditions. They worked 7 days a week, low wages, often dangerous jobs. And Labor Day came up as a way to really put a spotlight on those just really unfair work practices. And I just think about, you know, DSPs and just how unfairly you're compensated for what it is you do, how oftentimes, you know, you can't find full-time hours or get benefits, or you have to work a whole bunch of extra hours in order to, you know, just to have a life where you can raise a family. And I think you might be sort of the next wave of what Labor Day needs to be about. So anyway, it's kind of amazing that I'm here today because I have a confession, which is that before 2014, I didn't know any DSPs. And I didn't even think much about DSPs. And I didn't know what the acronym even stood for. I think I thought it stood for doing something powerful, which I kind of think it does. So if you want to change it to doing something powerful, that's a thought. But anyway, like so many other people, I would see a person who was obviously disabled, and they were out and about in the community. And I'd see that they had someone with them who was kind of a caretaker, right? But I didn't know many people with disabilities, and that means that I didn't know you. And I think that's why so many Americans don't know enough about your profession. Because the people who you care for, mostly people with disabilities, they're still mostly invisible to the rest of the world. And so the people who provide direct support to these people, which is you're kind of mostly invisible too, in a bad way, I think. And it shouldn't be that way. But I think human beings are pretty narcissistic. You know, if we don't have direct experience of something, we tend not to see it unless it's right in front of us. So we don't really even know what to advocate for, what to, you know, stand up for. You know, I mean, look, we've all been sick at different times. We have family members, maybe they're in a hospital, so we're really very well aware of the importance of the nursing profession or the medical profession or what lab techs do, you know, because we've experienced it. We've all been to school. We probably, a bunch of us still have kids who are in school. So we know that teachers are important because we've experienced it. And I'll say people certainly know about journalism. They read the news on their phones, they watch it on their TVs, and they even listen to the president say that journalists are the enemies of the people. So maybe sometimes massive public awareness of a profession is not always a good thing, or at least it's not that good today. Anyway, if I didn't know much about DSPs, then how did I get schooled, right? That's a question. What happened that set me on a path that brought me actually here today? So it happened because of a person named Christina, and this is her. And how I got to know her, it's a little bit of a story. So since I'm a reporter and I tell stories for a living, I'll tell you the story. So this one starts on March 6th of 2014 when I was at work, and a missing person alert popped up on my computer from the Philadelphia police. News organizations, we get these alerts like all the time. People go missing all the time, and then they're usually come back most of the time. I never knew people could go missing as often as they do. They just kind of take off and then they come back. So thankfully most of them come home, and when that happens, the Philadelphia police will send a follow-up notice saying that, you know, so-and-so has been found and they're in good shape or whatever. So in March of 2014, I got an alert that a woman named Christina Sankey had gone missing. She was 37 years old, and the police, they described her as endangered. So that's the word that they use to describe someone who's too vulnerable to be out in the world by themselves. You know, so you're talking about like little kids or elderly people who have dementia, or in the case of Christina, people with disabilities. Now, Christina was severely autistic. She was bipolar. She was unable to speak, and she had a very low IQ. So her disabilities gave her the reasoning and the comprehension abilities kind of as a toddler. And I don't mean to infantilize her because she was a 37-year-old grown woman. I'm just saying that she was probably as vulnerable in that way. She would just cross the street the way a toddler would. So the alert said that she'd been with a caregiver when she went missing from the downtown Macy's in Philadelphia. Now, the word caregiver really stood out for me because the police wouldn't have used that word if Christina had been with a family member or a friend when she went missing, or if, you know, it would have been much more, like it wouldn't have been specific. So there was something about the specificity of that I took note of. But I still didn't really think too much of it because, again, most people who go missing, they turn back up, even those whose vulnerabilities make them endangered. So the next day, the police sent another alert about Christina, and I presumed that she had been located and had returned home. But when I checked on the alert, the news was just terrible. Christina had frozen to death overnight. Her body was found between two parked cars about 5 miles from Macy's, where she had last been seen. And my first thought was, wow, there is going to be an uproar about this. And the reason why I thought that was because something kind of similar had happened back in 2010, when a 20-year-old guy named Brian Nevins, who had also profound disabilities, he died while he was in the care of the DSP at a private residential facility just outside of Philadelphia. Now, in Brian's case, a DSP had left him in a parked van on the hottest day of the summer, and for 5 hours, no one even noticed that he had been missing. But by the time they did, he had died of hyperthermia. So in his case, there was an immediate investigation, and the DSP was eventually convicted of felony neglect, involuntary manslaughter, and reckless endangerment. And I have to say that in that case, I think what swayed the jury was that the woman who was in charge of him had been like on her phone and texting for hours while this young man was dying. So it wasn't even like there was a brief lapse. They were able to show that there was something just pretty terrible had happened. So I presumed that sort of a similarly thorough investigation was in the works for Christina's death, because she too had died while in the care of a DSP, and sometimes you look and say, okay, well, was there professional culpability here? There may not be, but you should at least look, I think. But all I heard was silence, and I was like, huh. I wonder why reaction to Christina's case was so different than it had been to Brian's. Now, it's true, one death had happened inside the city, the other had happened outside. Police jurisdictions vary, you know, county by county. And so maybe this was just a matter of different protocols or investigations taking longer in a big, busy city than they do in a small, quiet suburb. But after a few weeks, it was really clear that the investigation was done. And the coroner had ruled that there was no foul play in Christina's death. So there were no signs of injury or strangulation or assault or anything horrible like that. She had died of natural causes because it is natural to die when you're exposed for a long time to sub-freezing temperatures, the way she had been. So the district attorney didn't bring charges. And when I asked the DA's office about it, it was clear that they presumed that because Christina could be a wanderer or an eloper, well, that's just a thing that happens. And, you know, I just got the sense that they were like, well, why are you, picking at this? Wanderers wander off, elopers elope, and sometimes they die. It's tragic, but what are you going to do? That's what people do. And it seemed like they had no understanding of people with disabilities. I didn't much either, but I knew that this other gentleman who had died, his case had been really investigated closely. So their attitude was such that, again, I was like, huh. Because I kept thinking, yeah, but how did Christina come to be missing? Isn't anybody curious about how she came to be missing? She died of natural causes, but how did that come about? So I also called the community umbrella organization that oversaw Christina's case, and they expressed sadness that such a tragic accident had happened, and so did the city's Department of Behavioral Health. But again, nobody was curious about how she went missing. So, like a lot of reporters, when my antenna go up, sometimes they won't go back down. Like, even when I wish they would. It can be a pain in the ass, I gotta tell you. But sometimes it's like, what am I gonna do? So I thought, well, let me track down Christina's family. And I wanted to find out and ask them what they thought of it. And if they were okay, if they had agreed that this was an accident, then I could just sort of, as a reporter, I could let it go. So that's how I found myself on a really bitterly cold morning in March of 2014, about 2 weeks after Christina died. And I'm walking up an icy block in Philadelphia, kind of a sketchy neighborhood. I'm going like around the drug dealers, and I'm like, do you know where this family lives? And they're like, oh, baby, go up this way. And I'm like, okay. They were so nice. So they got me to Christina's door. And they're like, oh, we heard about her. Man, that's bad. Anyway, so I knocked on the door of a woman who I knew from public records was named Patricia Sankey. And I heard these very slow, heavy steps and the rattle of keys. And then Mrs. Sankey opened the door. Now, she's this short, kind of round woman, she's maybe 4'10", but don't cross her. She has a presence about her that just, I think it came from advocating for her disabled kids. Her other daughter is disabled too. So she's standing there, and there's these tendrils of cigarette smoke are coming through the slats of the storm door, and the air inside is all cloudy, and she's looking at me very suspiciously. And I just asked if she was related to Christina, because I didn't know how she was related, if she was. And she said, I'm her mother. And I said that I was from the press, and I was just trying to understand how her daughter had gone missing in the first place. I said no one seemed to think it was a big deal that the DSP had lost track of Christina, that the police and coroner had been quick to dismiss her death as a tragic accident with apparently little additional investigation, and that there had been no mention of potential neglect, maybe, by the DSP in the routine police bulletin I read when Christina's body was found. And I said, look, I don't know if anything sinister or reckless happened. I just wonder why no one is giving her death sort of the additional scrutiny I would think it would deserve. And so I asked if I could come inside and speak to her, and she was like, no. She did not trust me, but she started to talk. And for half an hour, we were on opposite sides of this very smoky doorway. And she just poured her heart out. And she said that the DSP, a woman named Aisha, knew that Christina couldn't speak, that she was a wanderer, she was easily distracted, that in public places you had to keep her in view and within arm's length at all times or she would take off. Mrs. Sankey said she never should have been in Macy's. It's too big and busy. It was no place for Christina. Christina's favorite activity was to sit on the ground and roll a ball. So, and yet that's where Aisha took Christina that day. Now, security video would later show that Aisha was walking a good 5 steps ahead of Christina as she headed to a jewelry counter at Macy's, and then she totally ignored her while she looked at all the merchandise for kind of a long time. And that's when Christina wandered off. Security cameras caught her heading out the door, walking up a really busy city block and just crossing a street heedless. And you could see like she was almost hit by a car. And then she just vanished. She vanished. So Mrs. Sankey was convinced that no one was taking Christina's death seriously because her daughter was disabled, she was poor and black. And she was furious. And she was grief-stricken and she was helpless all at the same time. She said to me, you know, Christina was not going to set the world on fire, but she was my world. Well, that did it. Like, that just did it for me. I'm like, oh, I am so on this. I got to find out what happened. I wanted to just find out what happened for Christina, not just for her, but for her mom and also for her younger sister, Eliza, who also has intellectual disability. She's not as profoundly disabled, she's a lot more independent, but she's been inconsolable ever since. It's been 4 years and she's still is just inconsolable with losing her big sister. So eventually Mrs. Sankey let me into her home and into her life, and I wrote about what happened to Christina. And we put it right on the front cover of the paper. The story caused kind of a sensation, because finally, on Christina's behalf, people couldn't look away. So the Philly DA, the district attorney's office, they immediately convened a grand jury investigation into what happened on the last day of Christina's life. Basically, the grand jury found that Aisha had done everything wrong. It wasn't just that she brought Christina to Macy's and then ignored her. It was that once she realized Christina wasn't next to her, she waited for over an hour before calling the police, and then she lied to them about the timeline of her activity, which threw off the whole search. And then she ignored every protocol she had been taught, the ones that might have kept Christina safe or helped people find her. So the grand jury charged Aisha, excuse me, with a felony count of neglect of care of a dependent person and a misdemeanor count of reckless endangerment. She pled guilty and she was placed under house arrest for 11.5 to 23 months and put on probation, so she's still on probation. So right now, you know, you may be wondering, I feel like I wondered, why did it take a grand jury report to get justice for Christina? Why did no one take her death seriously until a newspaper wrote about it? And also as a journalist, I'm like, I can't put every single one of these stories on a front page. And I was just suspecting that there is more of these kind of stories out there. But I think the answer about why it took that effort is that because on the day she died, she didn't look like that adorable little toddler in that photo. She was a 37-year-old woman with an odd stare and an ungainly manner and a lopsided gait. But in many ways, of course, she was still the same inside as she was at the age of 2 or whatever it was when that first photo was taken. And just like a toddler, she could never, ever be left alone. But unlike other toddlers who outgrow their vulnerabilities, hers stayed with her until adulthood, right up until the day she died. And for all intents and purposes, she was the exact same toddler. She just didn't look that way anymore. And I think that's what happens with so many people with IDD. You know, kids, as they grow up, as they get bigger, they actually become more invisible to the world. It's this weird irony. And I think people think that because they look like adults, they give them more credit for being safer than they are. They actually need more protection the less they look like they need it. So it's a hard, hard thing. Now, it needs to be said that the police and the coroner and the other investigators who at first didn't take Christina's death seriously, they're all really good men and women. They really are. They're excellent public servants. But they had a blind spot, excuse me, they had a blind spot the way so many of us do. And when I say us, I don't mean you, I mean me and the people who are not in your world as regularly, like we're not in your world. So they have a blind spot when it comes to how we see and think about adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The behaviors that some people, as I said, with IDD have that may seem quirky or cute or harmless in a child, but they can be seen as bizarre and threatening in a grown man and woman. And again, that irony is that the bigger they get, the more they need us to be careful. So people stop seeing them, or if they do see them, they make assumptions that come from ignorance. They think they're drunk, or they're high, or crazy, or dangerous. That's always the one that gets me. They must be dangerous. Or they just ignore them because the odd behaviors make them uncomfortable. Now, at their most cruel, we might bully, fear, and make fun of them. And then at the saddest, we might not even think to wonder if their deaths are suspicious. So rarely do we imagine at first, and again, I'm saying we, not you, but rarely do we, the broader world, I think, imagine at first glance that people like Christina, they have people in their lives, who cherish them, have fun with them, will go to their graves worried about what might happen to them after they themselves are no longer there. One mother of a child with IDD told me, and I'm sure you may have heard this in different forms before, she said, "I hope I die 1 hour after my child dies." Just couldn't imagine leaving her child behind, and then she couldn't imagine living without her. Now, until I wrote about Christina, I was pretty much unacquainted with the world of IDD, and even then, I thought Christina's story would be sort of a one and done deal. sort of a story about a death that deserved investigating. But from the moment her story hit print, my phone started ringing off the hook and my email blowing up with emails and calls from parents of adult children with IDD. And they were from every walk of life, and they basically said, you don't know the half of what it is and what we go through. And they shared their own horror stories, and I'm sorry to say this, about caregiver abuse and agency incompetence. But they also talked about how hard it was to hold on to really good DSPs because they could not afford to work for them. They talked about political and public indifference to the needs of people with IDD. They talked about the lack of compassion and resources for elderly parents who become too old and frail to care for their aging, also impaired kids. And of course, they talked about, you all know this, that sudden elimination of educational options when a kid turns 21, which the descent is so rapid that they call it falling off the cliff. So all of these stories could fill a book. But I learned that each one would only nick the surface of a crisis that's overtaken us like a tsunami. We now have more intellectually and developmentally disabled adults living in this country than in any other time in our history. Advances in medical care have allowed kids born with Down syndrome, for example, to live twice as long as they did just 20 years ago. You know, that's a miraculous thing. And the explosion in the number of children with autism, you know, I think the current number now is about 168 are now diagnosed. It means that we're for a very long time, we're going to have a vast population of adults in need of services like those that Christina's family had hoped would keep her safe. And if you add these numbers to those of children born with two other most common roots of IDD, Fragile X syndrome and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and we've got this looming social, economic, and moral crisis. In fact, I don't even think it's looming. I think it's just here. And I think we're in denial. Or we. Remember that we. So what will we do about and with and for these vulnerable adults and the families who struggle to care for them? How much are we willing to pay for it? The families I met did not want pity. They adored their kids fiercely, you know that. They just needed more help navigating the complicated and brave, rewarding, frustrating, beautiful, bittersweet world of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I met scores of these families. They're dependent on a patchwork of supports whose struts are constantly battered by unpredictable caregivers, sloppy agencies, wavering government funding, plain old bad luck. Their need for competent help is daunting. But even for those lucky enough to get good help, the questions are many, you know, for the parents. What's it like to parent them, to parent kids with IDD who may never be able to advocate for themselves independently? Who's providing the day-to-day care to these vulnerable men and women? Who trains these caregivers and who has their backs? How are aging parents handling the care of their adult sons and daughters with IDD as they handle their own infirmities? And what happens to these children after their mothers and fathers die? So what I learned, and it's something that you've known for a long time, but I was new at it, I just learned that to parents of these kids, looking out for them is not just a lifelong obligation, but it's one they have to plan for well after their own deaths. So they go to the ends of the earth to ensure their sons and daughters will have, to the best degree possible, what all parents want for their kids, and what all of you want for your clients, which is safety, happiness, independence, meaning, belonging, and just being known and loved for who they are. But you know, it's hard. It takes time. Many parents sacrifice their own careers and relationships to care for their vulnerable children. Many of you sacrifice time with your own families to help care for these children. And I shouldn't use the word children because that implies, you know, like only youth. So forgive me on that. But anyway, it takes money, and for most parents, that's more than they can earn in a lifetime. And it takes public support. Every time a new state budget is considered, families and agencies, people in agencies, they shudder at the possibility that Medicaid dollars, which everyone relies on for services, are going to be slashed. That's how I ended up here, because through these parents, I learned about this entire world of people I'd never known before. Invisible people in the thousands who live and work and play and love among us all day long. Parents asked me to tell their stories because they wanted their children to be seen, heard, and known, the way all parents do, the way that you want them to be. They were so proud of their kids. So they asked me to introduce their world to the world at large. And so I did. There we go. So last December was when I published Falling Off the Cliff, that 4-part series. And then that series, and I did a bunch of follow-up stories, brought in even more calls and emails, including many from readers who said it gave them their first peek into the lives of adults with IDD. I was blown away by how little the non-disabled world knew about these people and about the DSPs who cared for them, and I was embarrassed that I had been among the uninformed for so long. Because these people, you know this, they're just some of the best people you'll ever meet. You know, the families are incredible, they're powerhouses, the DSPs, you guys who move heaven and earth for clients and families, you guys are rock stars. But above all, the clients themselves are just, they're wonderful, of course, you know? But so few people take the time or even maybe know how to get to know them beyond their disabilities. And if they did, they'd find out they're just like anybody else. They could be courageous, interesting, quirky, funny, persistent, surprising, and they can also be infuriating, bossy, cranky, insistent, set in their ways just like anybody else without disabilities can be. They're very special and not special at all, just like all of us. And I often think how sad that the able world doesn't know them or even really see them, because they're great. And so this is where I think you come in. People with disabilities need your advocacy, because as long as they're invisible, you will be too. A friend I've made named Maureen Devaney, she's the co-founder of a group in Philly called Vision for Equality, which is just great. She and Audrey Kochia founded it. They were young moms of very disabled daughters. And she made the saddest, truest observation about DSPs and the clients that they serve. Maureen's daughter, who is disabled, has had wonderful, wonderful DSPs, but Maureen has sometimes seen them struggle to make ends meet, or she's struggled to hang on to them, all the while caring for her daughter like she was their own. And Maureen said, DSPs are devalued people taking care of devalued people. So I think you're in the same boat as people with disabilities, because when they're not seen, you're not seen. And again, this is me as an outsider, and I'm here as an outsider just telling you what I see and what I think other people see or don't see, as the case may be. So when you advocate for people with disabilities, you actually can increase your own visibility. And as people with disabilities and their families become stronger self-advocates, they can also advocate for you, because you are the ones who help them live self-directive lives to the best degree possible. You guys are on both ends of the same stick. So how can you advocate for them? How can you do that? You know, by partnering with their clients and their families and agencies on every single right that they're fighting for. The more visible, again, they are, the more visible you'll be. Now, much of what the public hears about people with disabilities centers around their fight for equal rights, which is an ongoing battle because the rights have been hard won and they are forever in danger of being eroded. You know, in February, the House voted to weaken businesses' compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. You know, that's this landmark 1990 law that outlaws discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life. Jobs, school, transportation, and all private and public places that are open to the general public. And now they have to fight again to hang on to what the act has given them. So civil rights are forever the issue for people with IDD, or disabilities of all kinds. I don't want to segregate them out here. I mostly was looking at IDD in my series. So you get it. But why are they forever the issue? And again, it's because people who are unfamiliar with the world of IDD, disability in general, are unlikely to advocate for a population they don't know anything about. And that's really, I think, at the heart of why we're together here at this conference. It's at the heart of why the broader community should know about and care for DSPs and the clients they serve. So why should they care? Because we live in community with each other. We're connected to each other whether we realize it or not. Back in July, I was asked by the leaders of Mosaic, if anyone's familiar with that Midwest provider agency, to take part in a presentation that they wanted to make to community leaders in Omaha, Mosaic's home state. Mosaic wanted to make itself its mission, its clients, and its workforce more visible to the broader community, including the decision makers. So we began that presentation by asking these people, what kind of community do you want to be? How important is connection to you? And how strong of a community can you really be if you're not working on truly being connected to everyone who's in it? So just like DSPs and their clients, community and connection are also at two ends of the same stick. You do not have one without the other. Connection is what happens when you value each other, you feel supported, and then that's what determines a community's strength or weakness. So if you want to know if a community is strong, look at how well it's connected to all of its members, and you will have your answer. So as far as people with disabilities are concerned, connection can happen only if people with disabilities are actually seen, heard, and known. But we have to see and know their DSPs too, because they're the ones helping them have lives of self-determination to the best of their ability. So what are some of the things you can do to encourage the broader community to make sure that people with disabilities, and by extension, DSPs, are connected with a greater community? I would suggest maybe hold a meet and greet the way that they did at Omaha. It was astounding. About 150 people showed up. It was an ice cream social, so they're going to get to eat ice cream on a hot July night, and they were really attentive, and they were really interested. And I think that people are basically just like really pretty good people, and they don't want to say the wrong thing or make the wrong assumption. And here they were invited to come, and people are saying, it's okay, we're going to introduce you to this world that we're in. And connections were made that night. And I think that that's a really valuable way to begin to merge the world that you are in with the broader world. I mean, obviously, the big move for a long time now with disabilities is inclusion and being in the community. But sometimes those worlds still do not overlap in ways that would be really helpful if they could. So I would say this, hold a meet and greet. And the first suggestion that you can make and say, you want to get to know us, here's what you can do. Just get curious. You can tell them, please check your presumptions. If you see or meet someone whose affect seems a little off, or whose language is a little impaired, who makes you feel uncomfortable because his or her behavior seems different from your own, who you perhaps fear, judge, or maybe look away from, what should you do? And I think that's a real valid question that people say, I don't know what to do. And you can tell them, just stop. Just notice your perceptions. That's all. Just notice them. And in that moment of noticing, get curious. Just ask yourself some simple questions like these. I wonder what that man's name is. I wonder where he lives. I wonder what his family is like. I wonder how he spends his days. Wonder what kind of jokes he likes, what his favorite foods are, what obstacles he had to overcome to be right here, right now, at this moment. I wonder who loves him. I wonder what they love about him. I wonder who looks after him. I wonder what it's like to be that person who looks after him. You can tell them that just by asking these questions, even if they don't have the time or even the inclination to seek the answers, will at least set some presumptions aside and make room for what they can't possibly know when they see someone whose behavior is at odds with their own, and that looks so unfamiliar. And when they see the DSP who is by his side. This is so powerful. You and I both know that we live in a world designed for those with ability. Its default buttons are set to ability. That gives people without that gives people without disabilities a privilege they don't even know that they have. So you can gently tell these people that just by starting to see people who don't enjoy their privilege, they'll begin to level the playing field of power that is too often tipped against people with disabilities. And then, once you have their attention, well, what advice can you give them about how to connect with people with disabilities to make sure they're seen and heard and feel like they belong to this world and that this world belongs to them and that you are there to support them in that world? So here's some ideas that I think you can, if you can, start sharing with them. And I really beg your forgiveness. You all are so advanced and well-versed in this field, and I'm coming at it as an outsider, but also as a reporter who kind of sees what the outside world doesn't see and needs to see or hear. So I would just say keep advocating and say, could you please hire them? You know, tell them that America is only just beginning to understand that terms like IDD or disabilities in general describes a really broad and diverse group of individuals. You know, IDD, for example, while being inclusive of only about I read this somewhere, only about a half percentage point of the general population, it includes people who have been unable to develop obviously, you know, this basic personal care skills, but it also includes those who are capable of getting a high school degree or diploma and even attending college. I'm going to screw up the number, but I think there's something like 260 colleges right now have got programs for people with IDD. So we're living in this really kind of formerly unimaginable time when college is now an option for some people with IDD. That's a remarkable thing. But you know, that fact isn't always making it into the ears of employers. It's no wonder that the unemployment rate for people with IDD is so high. You know, 85% of people with IDD do not have paid work in the community. So when people in your community are looking to hire, let them know that talent and ability is as variable in the IDD population as it is in the general population. And by automatically including people with IDD as potential employees, and then perhaps some of you as the potential job coaches there for them, they will actually expand the size of the talent pool that they hire from. And that's just smart business, you know? And then besides that, you can tell them that a new study shows that hiring people with IDD is actually good for the bottom line. More than 3/4 of employees who were surveyed ranked their employees with IDD as good or very good on work quality, motivation, engagement, integration with coworkers, dependability, and attendance. In fact, many employers who reported being initially leery of hiring people with IDD quickly saw their worries dissolve once the employees settled into their jobs. So where can these employers find potential new hires? You know, many local agencies are now partnering with them. For example, there's a growing number of local chapters of a national nonprofit like Project Search. Don't know if you're familiar with that. But they place students with IDD into long internships with large employers. The students receive one-to-one job training, work experience, and transferable skills that often lead to employment, either at the internship site or elsewhere. And again, this is also a way for you to expand your job options because they are going to need some help. And it's a way to broaden that and to, you know, just sort of grow this sense and this idea of what is possible. And as what is possible for people with disabilities broadens, what is possible for you broadens as well. Another thing you can ask them, these community people at your ice cream social that they will love, ask them to take seriously the well-being of people with disabilities. You know, I recently interviewed a mother, she's right up there, named Jill Daleys, whose son Tommy lives in a group home and is nonverbal. And Tommy's 29, he needs 24-hour care, which Jill has come to rely upon. She's got stage 4 terminal cancer, and she's really fighting for her life. And when Tommy would come home on the weekend for visits, Jill often noticed a lot of bruising on his body. And again, I'm sorry to bring up, I know you said when people usually hear about DSPs, it's when things go wrong. But as news people, you know, we notice when things go wrong. But she would notice bruising, including clear outlines of a handprint. And when she would ask his caregivers for an explanation, they would just claim ignorance. They saw nothing, they knew nothing, and they were incurious. So finally, in frustration, she called 911, but the police who investigated spoke with the caregivers who said, no, Tommy's injuries are self-inflicted. And the police believed them, even though Jill said he has never done that. Maybe he developed the tendencies, perhaps. So she said that the only thing worse than seeing bruises on her vulnerable son was having law enforcement not take them seriously. She'd never felt so helpless or frustrated. So you can be advocates for vulnerable clients like Tommy because you, as frontline support providers, you know how vulnerable they are. You can advocate for law enforcement agencies to take special notice in cases where people with IDD or other disabilities suffer while with caregivers. And I know that sometimes that might be hard because if you're working in a place and you see other behaviors and you may be nervous about reporting it, because you need your job. My hope is that you would not be too afraid, and I'm sure you all have, but I'm just going to say it, that you would not be too afraid to call out those whose behavior isn't worthy of the clients that they serve. You actually have the moral authority in these instances. You have the moral authority. You're there. You're the one who can say, this is wrong, this has to stop, no. And you can just keep that standard high. You know, it already is high for you. So, and again, not to dwell too much, and of course you know that not every bruise or cut is indicative of something sinister. Sometimes accidents happen, but historically, in many circumstances, the people with the greatest instances of abuse happens to those who are nonverbal or unable to independently discuss the details of their lives. And that's just not people with disabilities, it's also little children who are sexually abused, or you know, the elderly who can't speak. It's anybody who is not able to sort of advocate for themselves in a way that other people may understand. So I would just ask you to tell them that it's not that law enforcement should automatically suspect abuse, but they shouldn't automatically discount it either. Just tell them that. Tell them to get curious. And you can also encourage law enforcement to undergo training so that they can get to know the disability population better. And when they do that, they'll get to know you better. And they have to know both. Because we've got to appreciate the caregivers. So brag about yourselves at this meet and greet. Please have meet and greets and just brag your heads off. Tell everybody what you do, tell them why it's important, why you love it. No doubt the community leaders you'll meet have seen people with disabilities out and about in the community, accompanied by a DSP. They might think, oh, that's just that person who sometimes is wearing scrubs, feeding a client. I wonder, you know, they don't know even how to ask beyond that. By telling community leaders about yourselves, they'll get curious, and the next time they see a DSP out and about with a client, they'll remember that behind just about every person with a disability is a DSP who's making their lives work for them. And then let the clients and their families advocate for you. And I know that you have a lot of them. I know that there's some families in here. They know better than anybody the difference between life and death you make for the men and women you take care of. And even if it's not life and death, then it's the difference between a happy life of dignity, respect, and compassion, or a sad life of loneliness and just kind of benign neglect in a way. Community leaders need to see you in action with your client, because if they don't, they won't be able to use their clout as public leaders to advocate for better wages and job conditions for you. And right now I want to give a call out to Felicia. Where are you, Felicia? There she is, in the back. So Felicia, she and I came in on the same shuttle from the airport, and she just started talking. If there's anyone in my family who needs a DSP, I am going to find her and bring her in. She told this beautiful story about how she was out with somebody who was, very disabled, and she was treating this woman so lovingly and with such affection and respect and good humor that someone else noticed and said thank you, and just made a point to say, I see you. And I give props to that woman for letting Felicia know that I see you. But I really give props to Felicia for just being the kind of person who would bring about that reaction in someone else. I think some of it has to do with her smile. She has like the most astounding smile I think I've seen in a long time. So, it's upsetting to know that we have such a dangerous shortage of DSPs to provide the care that every community relies upon. And not just people with IDD, but every person who will ever need care, like the elderly or the infirm. So when you meet your community leaders, I'm just going to keep pounding this, come armed with some facts. Scare them. Just go scare them. They can't be in denial. You're not. So tell them that by 2020, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that the equivalent of 1.2 million full-time DSPs will be needed to care for about 1.4 million Americans with developmental disabilities needing residential, vocational, and other supports. And tell them that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has projected that home health care and personal care aides will be two of the 3 fastest growing occupations in the country between now and 2024. And then tell them that the NADSP is working to create a standard occupational code for DSPs. Because you guys are not... You're not home health care people or personal care aides or babysitters or nursing assistants. You are DSPs. And what you do with clients is going to be as different and unique for each client as they are, because that's what you have to do. And that's what they require, and that's what they deserve. And you need a code that says that. So go NADSP. I hope, I haven't looked at the petition in a little while, so I'm not sure. 12,000. What do you need to get?
Well, we've exceeded the 10,000.
Okay.
But we're shooting for 20.
Okay, they're shooting for 20. If you don't know about this, sign it, share it, and then share it and share it, and when you're done, share it. So because your work is so unique, that's why you need your own code. I mean, you know this, it's physically demanding, it's emotionally challenging, it requires extensive skills and ongoing training, yet workers are so underpaid, and they rarely receive benefits like insurance, sick leave, and paid time off. Like, I couldn't work. I couldn't do what I do with those conditions. I couldn't, say, look, I really need some full-time hours this week, and they're like, well, we'll let you know. Who can live that way? And I think what I do for a living is important, but I think what you do is 10 times more important. So you're not gonna, we just need to take it seriously, like really seriously. So let your community leaders know how short-sighted it is when legislators argue that their states cannot budget more for DSP income. Because DSPs, like many other low-wage workers, they're often America's working poor. You are working your asses off and you're not making ends meet. So many DSPs have to rely on supplemental government assistance to help, like food stamps, Medicaid, and LIHEAP. And despite your insulting wages, you're expected to possess, professional skills and knowledge and demonstrate the highest of value and ethics. I mean, why don't they just ask you to, go solve cancer while you're at it, Throw that on your list. And you need to tell them how even the most committed workforce members are leaving positions and clients they love because they need a family-sustaining wage. Now, just as an aside, tomorrow you're going to meet Nick Smith. This is Nick up here. Where's Nick? Oh, hey, looking good, Nick. I got a chance to, when I wrote the series, I got a chance to meet Nick. And the gentleman who he provides one-on-one support for, Will Ridley. Now, man, when they are together, you can tell Nick is adored by Will's family, and by his family, and by the agency as well. But Nick, and I feel okay saying this because he said it in print, he's got to work 60 hours a week to make ends meet. So I would say introduce the Nicks in your field and the Felicias. Introduce them to your community leaders and ask them to please start valuing the critical workforce that you all comprise, especially at state budget time, when agencies will lobby them to support spending plans that promote fair compensation for these DSPs. Another thing you can ask your leaders is to please refine anti-discrimination policies against people with disabilities so that they include people with IDD. Oftentimes anti-discrimination policies that aim at protecting the non-discrimination rights of people with disabilities will focus primarily on those whose disabilities are physical only, which doesn't mean that they aren't profound and they don't need, advocacy for sure. But, people who are, say, vision impaired or hearing impaired or depend upon wheelchairs and other assistive devices, they still require communities, workplaces, and public spaces to be physically accessible. But if they experience discrimination in these areas, at least many of them are able to yell about it, and they're able to advocate for themselves to a certain degree because their cognition is not impaired. But people with IDD may not be able to do the same. And I think that our anti-discrimination laws have to be expanded or changed somehow to recognize that. So try to help leaders become attuned to what discrimination against someone with an IDD might look like, whether it's in the workplace or while dealing with public employees or riding public transit, whatever. Suggest these people maybe undergo training and even offer to help them. You can help ensure that their dealings with customers or clients who have IDD are respectful and appropriate. You can also tell these leaders and other people, just extend the hand of friendship. Tell your new friends, these new leaders, they're gonna love you by the end, by their third bowl of like butterscotch ice cream. They're gonna be so happy. But tell them that sometimes the most important thing that anyone can do is to support people with IDD, their families and their DSPs, not just with dollars and programs, but with friendship. You know, it can be so isolating to take care of someone with an IDD. As much as we talk about community inclusion and the beauty of it, it can still be hard, as you know. You don't need me to tell you that. So ask them maybe grab lunch together with someone, or offer to spend time with some, with an IDD client, someone who requires continual vigilance. And if they have behaviors that are challenging, well, don't we all? Like we all do. Nudge them. Tell them to get to know you and your clients anyway. Felicia, this is on you, okay? I want to hear you do that. Because that's what people in a strong community do. They accept and they embrace and they enjoy each other for who they are. And also, you want to celebrate the good stuff. I recently read a Facebook post, what did I just say? A Facebook post, or a paste, asking why the mainstream media does not cover the Special Olympics the way it covers the regular Olympics. And I thought, that is a great question. That's a great question. It never occurred to me that we should. I was like, oh, there's Special Olympics. Why would we not cover them? I don't know, but maybe we should start. So my only answer was that, the media, we can fall asleep as anyone, as easily as anyone else when it comes to covering the accomplishments of people with disabilities and the DSPs who help them get there. So my advice is this. If you hear a story that makes you go, wow, someone should write about that, pick up the phone or hop on Twitter to bug your local media to cover it. And when they do, if they do, share it like crazy among all your social media networks. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, really just like push it out there. News publishers are very interested in which stories get traction and which ones don't. Now those numbers, and this is an honest thing, they don't necessarily skew our coverage, but it would be a lie to say that they don't hit our radar. One of the things that I think has been encouraging was when I did the Falling Off the Cliff series, that got a lot of traction. And then the series sort of helped generate more lead stories, and I did additional stories. And we've kind of created a readership now for stories about this population called people who have disabilities. That's a really good thing for publishers to know that, hey, there's a readership, there's a population, there are citizens out there who aren't seeing themselves and their worlds reflected in the media. So this is a chance to expand that. I always like to say that, the forefathers, they said in the preamble to the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union, we will do A, B, and C. And we've spent the last 200 whatever years trying to get it more perfect. Okay, I guess we have to get rid of slavery now. Okay, I guess we have to let women vote now. Okay, I guess we have to keep trying to get it more perfect. And I think the same can be said with journalism, with civil rights, with all of it. We're just in the game, and we keep trying, and I can speak for my colleagues in saying that. So in closing, I think I'd like to say that a strong DSP community is one that listens and promotes its members and that advocates loud and very often for the clients they love and serve so well. Everybody has a story. Everybody deserves to be heard. And you are in a unique position to tell the stories of those who may not be able to tell their own. But in telling their stories, yours will also be heard. Because remember, connection and community are two ends of the same stick. Clients and DSPs are two ends of the same stick. And when you pick up the stick, you pick up all of it. And that's the DSP story the world needs to hear, and I think it's the story that only you can tell. Thanks.